This is undoubtedly Walter's most explosive performance. To highlight the depth of human despair, he relies solely on a series of hair-raising bitter smiles to evoke empathy from countless viewers. As a result of this show, Walter has won over 40 Best Actor awards from various organizations. By the end, you will undoubtedly be in awe of his superb acting skills. Following the previous episode, Gus successfully annihilated the Mexican cartel with his meticulous plan, avenging his old friend. This also laid the foundation for establishing his powerful business empire. Due to Jesse's outstanding performance this time, Gus plans to let him manage his own lab independently. This means that Walter can be replaced at any time. Although Jesse had a quarrel with Walter before going to Mexico, he still pleaded on Walter's behalf.
Let Mr. White go. Pay him off or fire him. Don't kill him.
You know that won't work.
Then you got a problem.
It seems Gus is determined to kill Walter. Meanwhile, Walter is taking Hank to investigate Gus's chicken farm and seizing the opportunity to inquire about Hank's progress on the case. Hank also heard about the events in Mexico and mentioned that many people seem to have died. Walter thought Jesse was dead and could no longer hide his worried expression. Hank noticed Walter was troubled and asked with concern.
So when are we going to talk about your face?
I don't want to get into it, okay?
No, it's not okay. My brother-in-law shows up looking like Macho Camacho and he thinks we're not going to discuss it? You know, buddy, if you're in over your head on something, don't you think I might be the guy to come to?
Hank knew Walter had lost control again and tried to comfort him by using the example of an old friend. Hearing this, Walter also understood why Hank said it. Due to his fight with Jesse, Walter did not attend his son Walter Jr.'s birthday party. Afterward, Walter Jr. found Walter, and to explain his miserable state, Walter had to use his relapse as an excuse. It was obvious Walter Jr. had told Hank about Walter's secret. Walter felt a twinge of jealousy because, in Walter Jr.'s heart, he would never measure up to Hank.
I know he got on a ride that was rough to get off of. I'm just saying I'm here, you know. I'm gonna talk about it.
I don't want to talk about it. To you or to anyone else. I'm done explaining myself.
This also revealed Walter's attitude toward Hank and his determination never to turn himself in. On the other hand, Gus, having avenged his great hatred, came to Hector. Gus took out Don's necklace and told Hector that, except for him, their entire family was gone, and their only grandson was also killed by Jesse. Seeing Hector's painful expression, Gus finally felt his hatred dissipate, but it was precisely because of this hatred that it became Gus's greatest weakness. After watching this season finale, you'll understand. The next day, Walter was called by Hank again to be his driver, continuing to secretly investigate Gus's territory. Walter appeared relaxed and secretly pleased, knowing Hank wouldn't find any clues at the chicken farm. But to Walter's surprise, this time Hank wasn't going to the chicken farm but to Gus's large laundry facility. He didn't expect Hank to be so clever. Based on the lead of Gail ordering large air filter hectorn equipment, Hank quickly suspected the laundry. Walter hadn't told Gus's men to prepare for such an investigation. In desperation, Walter deliberately caused a car accident and successfully sent the still injured Hank back to the hospital. To prevent Hank from discovering him, Walter had to go to work this way, because Walter had been serving as Hank's driver these past few days. He noticed the lab equipment still had residual heat, indicating someone had already replaced him. He urgently asked Tyrus who was working there. With a wicked smile, Tyrus mocked, "Do you think no one else can do this job besides you?" Walter immediately guessed that Jesse had returned, so he hurried to Jesse's house. Because of the last time they had a bad fight, Jesse did not want to pay a 10 hectorn to Walter. Seeing Jesse's girlfriend Andrea and her child at home, Walter asked Jesse to give him the length of one song to talk. Walter asked Jesse if he was making contraband on his own. Jesse didn't deny it and even responded to Walter confidently.
Jesse, if you agree to replace me, he will kill me.
You brought your brother-in-law to our What the wrong with you?
It's not my fault, Jesse.
Get talking.
Okay, just, you gotta help me, please.
Last time I asked for your help, you said, I hope you end up buried in a barrel in the Mexican desert.
This was practically playing with Walter's life. Has Jesse forgotten about Gail? Walter could ruthlessly kill Gail, who was set to replace him, but he never thought of harming Jesse. As Walter turned around, He noticed Gus's man had already tracked him down. With the lesson learned from Gale, Gus would never allow Walter to harm Jesse. The next day, Walter was taken to a remote area where Gus issued him a final ultimatum.
You are done. Fired. Do not show your face at the laundry again.
Hearing this, Walter brazenly asked Gus what would happen if he couldn't comply. Gus instantly flew into a rage. Furious that this old man would still be so defiant in the face of death, Walter also guesses that Jesse must be pleading for him or else Gus wouldn't have kept him around until now. Walter exposed Gus's scheme to sow discord, sarcastically noting that despite Gus exploiting Jesse's weaknesses for various gains, in the end, Jesse still wouldn't let Gus kill him. Walter had seen through it all. He was just frustrated by his inability to eliminate his powerful adversary first. Gus says Jesse will come around and accuses Walter of promising that Hank wouldn't find out about him, but Walter didn't. Now it was Gus's turn to deal with Hank.
Now it's left to me to deal with him.
Can't.
If you try to interfere, I will kill your wife. I will kill your son. I will kill your...
Gus says these words more harshly than he would kill Walter. And with that, he turns to leave. Tyrus untied Walter, and the group left him behind. Once Jesse was convinced, Walter's days would be numbered. A person with as many weaknesses as Jesse would likely be easily handled by Gus. Meanwhile, Saul was scolding his two most trusted men for their incompetence regarding Skyler's request to handle Ted.
He's an act of God.
Checks in the mail, at least.
Oh, hello, Mrs. White. The good news is the IRS has been paid off. The bad news is...
Just as Saul was unsure how to explain things to Skyler, Walter, who had just narrowly escaped death, suddenly burst in. Saul thought Walter had discovered Skyler's secret she had entrusted Saul to keep and was angrily coming to settle the score. It turned out to be a false alarm. Previously, Saul had menhectorned to Walter the ultimate solo hectorn, disappearing and starting a new life. Faced with Gus's death threat, Walter wanted to disappear with his family.
You can't contact your friends or relatives ever again!
All right, yes, I understand.
How are you going to sell this to that wife of yours and your teenage son?
I have got no choice.
It's gonna cost you.
How much?
The last quote I got on the deluxe was 125 grand, but you got 4 people to vanish. It's gonna be at least $500,000, and he accepts cash only.
I've got the money. Now, come on, please.
Here.
Before leaving, Walter asked Saul to call the police and report that Hank was in danger and needed Protect Hectorn.
Please, you got to do it for me. I'm begging you. Please. My brother-in-law doesn't deserve to die because of this.
There's no way I'm mentioning Gus.
Okay.
The most I'll go, I'll say it's the cartel. They're coming back to finish the job that they botched.
You say whatever you have to say. You just give me an hour to... I need to collect my wife and kids, okay? Just give me an hour, and then you make the phone call. Don't forget, please.
In the end, Saul agreed to Walter's request, but an even more desperate hectorn awaited Walter. When he arrived in the basement, he found that his hidden cash was gone.
What did that phone call mean?
Where is it? Where's the rest? The money, Skyler, where is the rest?
Seeing the about-to-collapse Walter, Skyler, who had secretly used the money, didn't know how to explain.
I gave it to Ted.
Gave our money to Pennick.
Saul had already hinted at this problem, as Skyler's AC hectorns had become the final straw that broke Walter. At this moment, Walter's performance reached its peak. In Walter's most desperate moment, Marie also called for help, saying she had received police notice that Hank was in mortal danger.
The cartel, they want to kill Hank. Oh, God. They're sending agents to our house right now to guard us. God! When is this going to end?
Skyler held back her emo hectorns and took the call, returning to the scene just shot. This was undoubtedly the ugliest moment captured of Skyler in the entire series. This was also a satire of their AC hectorns. In their relentless pursuit of money, they ultimately hoisted themselves by their own petard. The episode's ending, driven by the actors' excellent performances and deep-seated satire, gradually pushed the plot to a climax. promising even more thrilling stories ahead. Walter is on the verge of collapse because he just learned that the money he risked his life for was secretly given by his wife to another man. The despairing Walter can't accept this cruel reality, as without that money, his family's lives would be threatened by Gus. After calming down, Walter makes a bold decision. The police have already received Saul's anonymous tip-off that someone is coming to kill Hank, so there will be 24-hour Protect Hectorn at Hank's house. But Marie is still on edge. Walter arranges for Skyler and the kids to go to Hank's house, ostensibly to comfort the frightened Marie. But in reality, to keep them out of harm's way, Walter decides to face everything alone. Skyler disagrees with Walter facing the danger, but Walter has no other choice at this point. Before leaving, Walter calls Hank, saying he still has to run the car wash and expressing concern for Hank's safety. Walter kisses his daughter lovingly, knowing it might be his last kiss. After his wife leaves, Walter sits alone by the pool, with the gun he previously intended to use against Gus on the table. He spins the gun to see fate's will, but unfortunately, the first 2 times the barrel points at him. This signifies Walter's current perilous situation. Unwilling to accept this, he spins the gun one more time. This time, the barrel points at an orchid nearby. Walter looks at the orchid thoughtfully. This sets the stage for the rest of the episode. Meanwhile, everyone is terrified by the threat except Hank. Hank thinks it's likely that the higher-ups are displeased with his unauthorized investigation into Gus and are using this method to keep him homebound. This only makes Hank more suspicious of Gus, so he suggests Steven investigate Gus's laundry facility. Steven says he doesn't have a court-issued search warrant, but Hank argues, "What warrant? Don't we usually just go in for interviews?" Hank deliberately goads Steven, implying he's not as good in this aspect. They often bet against each other during their joint investigations. The scene shifts to Steven arriving at Gus's laundry facility for an investigation to prove he can get the job done without a search warrant. Steven uses various examples and metaphors with the employee, explaining that he just needs to take a few photos and leave quickly, hoping for cooperation. He meant Hectorns that if he did get a search warrant, he would turn the place upside down. After weighing the Hectorns, the employee agrees to Steven's inspection. Fortunately, Gus's underground lab is well hidden, and even with police dogs, they find nothing suspicious. Gus, watching the situation unfold on his surveillance monitors, calls Jesse in the lab and blames Walter for this severe situation. Gus's goal is to convince Jesse to let him kill Walter, but Jesse still refuses to let Gus harm Walter. After his shift, Jesse tries to contact Walter for a serious talk but can't get through. Hearing several urgent messages from Saul, Jesse rushes to Saul's office. Before meeting Saul, Huel thoroughly searches Jesse. This scene sets up a plot point for later. Saul is also planning to skip town and wants to return Jesse's money before leaving. While handing over the money, Saul tells Jesse about Walter's predicament. Jesse is shocked that Gus would move against Walter so quickly. Back home, Jesse lies on the couch, distressed, when his girlfriend Andrea calls to say her son Brock is in the ICU. Jesse rushed to the hospital and saw Andrea's worried face. Jesse could only go up to comfort him. After the doctor came out, Andrea was called to accompany Jesse could only wait outside, preparing to smoke. Jesse suddenly realizes the cigarette with rice and Walter gave him is missing. Jesse suspects Walter stole it and poisoned Brock. He rushes to tell Andrea that Brock was poisoned by ricin and advises the doctors to treat him accordingly, then hastily leaves to confront Walter. At home, Walter is extremely cautious, drawing all the curtains. Only after seeing it's Jesse alone does he carefully open the door. Walter tells Jesse about Gus's threats, but Jesse isn't interested in hearing it. During their conversation, Walter places his gun on a cushion and then goes to check if anyone is watching outside. Seizing the moment, Jesse grabs the gun and points it at Walter. Furious, Walter is bewildered. Jesse directly accuses Walter of poisoning Brock because Huel searched him at Saul's office. Jesse believes Walter orchestrated it. Jesse's logic seems flawless. An innocent-looking Walter denies everything, insisting he didn't harm Brock. Jesse thinks Walter is seeking revenge against him, pushing Walter to the ground in anger.
Listen to me, what would I have to gain? What possible could I, who would...
Suddenly, Walter has an epiphany. He first chuckles bitterly, then suggests it must be Gus's plan. Walter recalls Tomas's death and insists only Gus would harm a child. Walter argues that Gus's men took the cigarette to frame him and provoke Jesse into killing him. Jesse insists only they knew about the ricin. Walter counters that Gus sees everything through his cameras, knowing their every move.
If you think that I am capable of doing this, then go.
my head and kill me right now.
I'll do it.
Do it! Do it. Do it!
I'll do it.
Eventually, Jesse is convinced by Walter, determined to confront Gus. Jesse is stopped by Walter, who urges a more strategic approach. Jesse spends the night at the hospital, not returning to the lab. The next morning, Jesse is woken up by Tyrus, who reminds him to get back to work or the shipment will be scrapped, a loss no one can afford. Jesse is indifferent and says if Gus is unhappy, he should come talk to him personally instead of sending a lackey like Tyrus. Annoyed, Tyrus attempts to force Jesse, but in the public setting, he fails and reports back to Gus. This is exactly what Jesse intended. Jesse texts Walter, revealing his plan to lure Gus to the hospital, giving Walter an opportunity. Walter, at home, is preparing a remote-controlled bomb, successfully testing its detonahectorn. To placate Jesse, Gus indeed visits the hospital, but Jesse only wants to kill him. Despite Gus urging Jesse to focus on work first, Jesse remains solely concerned with Brock's candyhectorn. Jesse reveals the poisoning incident, but Gus, like Walter, reacts with a look of shock. Without spoilers, many viewers are left unsure who poisoned Brock, a mystery that will be unveiled in the finale. Realizing he can't sway Jesse, Gus reluctantly compromises.
Stay with the boy. Tyrus will dump what's there. You, when you are ready to return. Next week.
Leaving the hospital, Gus's usual cartel senses something amiss. Walter, watching from across the street with binoculars, has planted the bomb on Gus's car, ready to detonate once they get in. But Gus doesn't enter the car. Instead, he surveys the surroundings. In the end, Walter's plan fails. Gus and his men leave without a hitch. Up next is the most thrilling episode of the series, featuring the ultimate showdown between Walter and Gus.